Hello and welcome back to my channel, where together we indulge ourselves in the ever-flowing streams of nostalgia by playing video games that are soul certified. I am Serge and I have come up with a list of 20 different PS2 games that I missed out on in my teenage years when PS2 was in its prime, but that were always on my radar. Up until now, we've managed to cover 2 of them. The Japanese exclusive and English patched Berserk Millennium Falcon Hensei Masenki no Sho, as well as Oni, both of which turned out to be games of a questionable nature. So in order to wash away the aftertaste they'd left and ensure that I'm going to have some actual fun this time around, I decided to shift my focus from, sure, innovative but rather janky action-adventure games to something I might fully enjoy. So today, we are going to be covering X-Men Next Dimension. I mean, how can I not enjoy it? It's a game about X-Men, one of the most iconic superhero teams in the comic book history, rivaling the likes of the Avengers and the League of Justice. And it's also a fighting game? Buddy, I love fighting games. And unlike my younger self, nowadays I can actually consider myself being somewhat good at them. Well, to a point. At the very least, I like to dig into them beyond the simple button-mashing phase. Learning cool combos, figuring out matchup strategies, some basic frame data, and competing online are now a part of the course for me when checking out the newest, hottest Street Fighter, Tekken or Guilty Gear entry. Look, I even got a couple of those fighting-specific controllers, and surely they make me a better player, right? Right? And I'm certain that all of that will help me obtain a newfound appreciation for this game. Yeah, you heard me, I did say newfound. Unlike Oni and Berserk, which I hadn't had any experience with before making the video reviews, I actually do have a brief experience with our today's subject. It went like this. In my hometown of Odessa, Ukraine, there was this niche underground store which sold bootlegged PS2 games. Unlike most stores, however, the games sold in there were far from mainstream, and often without any translation patches applied. For a teen who was exposed only to games that had some sort of localization, no matter how broken it is, this was hardcore. And this is precisely where I found X-Men Next Dimension. I got it, went home, booted up my beloved PS2 Fat model and inserted the disc into the drive. I tried out the story mode and got my butt absolutely handed to me by the AI opponents. I couldn't get past like the 3rd battle of the story mode, so the very same evening I returned it, and knowing me got some crap like Crash Nitro Kart Racing instead. For some reason though, that brief interaction that I had with X-Men Next Dimension stuck with me, to the point that I eventually decided to pick it up again and give it another go. Though sadly, by that time it had already been sold to some other poor soul, and throughout the following years I never managed to find it elsewhere. Well, good thing that in our year's lore 2024 we have practically the entire library of PS2 games available online. So there I was, 15 years later, downloading the ISO of the game, hooking up my trusty PS2 Slim to my Elgato HD 60S Plus capture card, and being ready to give X-Men Next Dimension a fair chance with all of my accumulated fighting game experience. With the simple goal of clearing up for myself, what exactly made it stick with me for all these years? So sit back, grab some snacks and drinks, and please enjoy my review of X-Men Next Dimension. Released on Tuesday, October 22nd, 2002 in the US, and Friday, November 22nd in Europe, X-Men Next Dimension is the 3rd installment of the X-Men Mutant Academy fighting games trilogy. Developed by Paradox Development, not to be confused with Paradox Interactive or Paradox Development Studio, an American video game studio that later got turned into Midway Los Angeles. Aside from the Mutant Academy titles, you may remember them for the controversially violent PlayStation title Thrill Kill, that got cancelled literally 1 month before its intended release date and then rebranded into Wu-Tang Shaolin style. Thankfully though, a person or a group of people from Paradox Development were awesome enough to leak the full, complete game of Thrill Kill online. so it's readily available for anyone willing to try it out. Fun fact! It was actually sold in our stores, and I clearly recall playing it at my buddy's house when I was a kid. That should tell you a lot about our local gaming market in the early 2000s, both from the fact that it was sold as a legit game and that it was sold to a 11-year-old child. During the research phase for this project, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that upon being acquired by Midway, the studio would release a certified PS2 hit, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, arguably one of the, if not the best spin-offs of all time. And I'm not just talking fighting games, but video games in general. Speaking of bangers, back in my middle school days, I, like many, owned a PS1. It was late enough into that generation of consoles that my parents bought me not the original PlayStation, but the newer, slim model, which, unlike many, I prefer the visual aesthetics of. Being this little chubby kid who enjoyed my PS1, button mashing and comic books, I of course owned a copy of X-Men Mutant Academy 2 and played lots and lots of it. For those curious, yes, it's the very same game that had such hidden characters as Spider-Man, as well as the only instance of playable Professor X that I know of. Gameplay-wise, it followed the steps of classic Capcom arcade games like X-Men Children of the Atom, where characters' moves fluently chained one into another, allowing players to create combos of various complexity, from simple chain of normal attacks into specials to full-fledged juggles akin to something like Guilty Gear entries. Pretty much every kid in my neighborhood and at school who'd owned a PS1 had this game, so we used to share our strategies, secrets, rumors, half of which of course weren't true, and compete against each other thinking that if you mashed the buttons harder and faster, you'd be advantageous. You know, kinda like modern MK players online. So imagine my surprise all those years later when, on a beautiful spring afternoon of 2004 that was stuck in this limbo of post-winter cold yet pre-summer warmth, I found what seemed to be a direct sequel to one of my favorite childhood games at the aforementioned underground video game store. I got home, booted it up, and sure, there it was. An X-Men fighting game, but with better graphics, and a new gameplay feature, 3D movement mechanics akin to Virtua Fighter, Soul Calibur, Tekken, and Dead or Alive. It didn't really occur to me back then that this new gameplay change was the exact reason why, instead of naming it Mutant Academy 3, the developers viewed it as a fresh new start, by adding this extra next dimension, if you will, as a natural way of progressing the series within the fighting games genre, which, when you think about it, was a strategy that many fighting game series of that time followed. I remember clear as day how I went straight into the arcade mode to check the roster. Wow, I thought to myself, Toad sure looks weird as heck. And why is Rogue balding? In fact, all of the characters looked somewhat weird. It felt like they took the low-poly nature of the PS1 game and tried to smooth it out and make it higher res. Also, I thought to myself, why there is no music on the character's select screen? Tekken 4 had a great moody track playing when selecting a character. The only sound effect this game has provided me thus far was this uncomfortable, blobby sound when switching between menus. Well, at least when in-game there was in fact some music, and the actual in-game models didn't look half bad. Not good compared to the likes of Tekken or Dead or Alive, but not too bad. And stages? They were pretty awesome. So filled with these mixed notions and the baggage of my accumulated video games experience that forced me into the state of expectations, I went into the story mode, and it was okay, I guess. At least until I got to the Sentinel fight at the X-Men Mansion outskirts. I tried so hard to beat it, yet again and again the mutant-hating soulless machine would give me no chance. Then I tried to boot up the arcade, and by stage 4, there I was again, defeated. a solution popped into my head. To go straight into the training mode with the goal of learning some cool combos. X-Men Mutant Academy 2 had combo trials after all. Surely this game has them too. Not even a combo list. Only normal attacks, specials and supers were listed. All of those accumulated frustrations from the unfulfilled expectations for a next-gen sequel of a game I really liked didn't sit right with me, so I was ready to label the game as bad. Within the next hour I was back at the store and asked to swap it by paying extra 10 Ukraine monies for some other game. Knowing me, it had to be something akin to Sonic Heroes. And knowing me, I probably had a really good time with it. Well, I'm not that kid anymore. I am a grown-up, matured and soul-drained adult, and I will not let some video game beat me this time. My younger self, this one's for you. As mentioned, I now consider myself to be much better versed in fighting games compared to how I was 10 years ago. So the first thing I wanted to make absolutely sure of when booting up the game and experiencing flashbacks of my childhood memories is whether this game indeed did not have a tutorial. Nowadays we take it for granted how good we have it with modern fighting games, as they are not only being simplified in general, but also the user experience became much better. Since the last generation of consoles, every major fighting game released has pretty in-depth learning tools. And I'm not just talking about combo trials, but actual explanations of the intended mechanics, key character moves, with examples and options to train them in-game, as well as frame data. As you'd expect, none of that applies to this game. And yes, my memory did serve me right. X-Men Next Dimension only lists normal moves, specials and supers. So the very least I could do to sort out the fundamentals is to check out the control scheme. As you can see, that already lifts the veil over some of the game's mechanics. Akin to Tekken and 3D era MK games, you have 2 punches and 2 kicks assigned to face buttons. You also have a throw that you can perform by either pressing the R1 button or 1+3. For those who are not closely intertwined in the fighting games discourse, I'm using the button notations for the 3D fighters as well as MK games, where 1 stands for square, 2 is triangle, 3 being cross, and 4 is circle. Having transitioned into the third plane, the game enables player to 8-way walk by holding the L2 button. Even though it's nowhere near as fluid and dynamic as the 8-way run of Soul Calibur, it still allows for a new layer of counterplay by being able to avoid attacks and projectiles in the 3D space. Furthermore, like Tekken, it has a shortcut for sidestepping and sidewalking left and right by tapping the up or down on the D-pad, letting it go to neutral position and then tapping or holding it again. One very unique thing about this game that I can't really recall any other fighting game implementing either before or since is the meter transition mechanic. Like many other 2D fighters, this game has a super meter bar, divided into 3 sections for level 1, 2 and 3 super attacks respectively. So imagine a world where you want to use the level 3 super since it's the best one your character has, but you only have 1.5 bar of meter filled in. No fret, young gamer, as by holding the L1 button you can redistribute all of your accumulated meter into the 3rd bar, enabling you to perform that move. Furthermore, if you use level 1 super while having, let's say, 2.5 bars filled, your level 2 still remains at your disposal, while level 3 will remain half filled. So you can keep strategically redistributing your meter to have access to supers for as much time as you can throughout the match. Here's a twist, however. If you play conservatively and fill in all 3 bars, you get access to a very powerful level 4 move that spans the entire meter bar, but is often the best super move your character has. The meter system is what makes this game truly unique and interesting. As noted, I've personally never seen any other fighting game attempting it, so if the franchise still lived, I feel that this would have been one of its distinctive prominent features. The super moves themselves are all quite cool and cinematic, however I was slightly disappointed by the fact that most of them transitioned into Next Dimension straight from Mutant Academy 2, with minimum extra flair or alterations. I know it's not a huge deal, but I'd surely appreciate something new and unique by the third installment of a franchise. Then there's the final mechanic we can deduct from glaring at the controls menu, and it is the counters. I have to be honest, I never managed to land a single counter while playing this game. But judging by how often the AI managed to pull it off against me and to reverse my block strings, I'm sure it's pretty powerful if you learn how to do it. Just don't try to do it against the CPU opponents, they would never fall for it and there's a huge recovery window after initiating it, so I just gave up on it altogether as it did me more harm than good. So now that we've gone over all the main controls and mechanics, it's time to delve into one of the most fun things about pretty much any fighting game: doing combos. And yeah, this game really doesn't teach you anything about how they work here. On the surface it's pretty simple. By stringing together punches and kicks, you get attack chains. Dial a combo system if you will. You can cancel most of your attack chains into special moves, or even finish your strings and then, even if the opponent is already on the ground, perform a finishing special move on them, provided your special's hitbox is low enough to connect with the laying foe. In the fighting game community we call them OTG moves. Like with many other FGs, there are high, low and overhead attacks. Some moves also have unique effects. For example, leaving your opponent stunned if hit against the wall even on block. And, of course, there's launchers. And here we are getting into the juicy part, because juggles and air combos is where X-Men Next Dimension shows some depth. Even though that depth was not necessarily intended by the game's creators. Let me explain. Like in Mutant Academy 2, you can hold up after doing any launching, super, special or normal move, initiating what is called the chase sequence, where your avatar looks at the opponent as they fly high in the air and then jumps after them, allowing you, the player, to perform air combos that you can end with an air special, super move or a throw. Pretty basic stuff, reminiscing of Guilty Gear dust combos if the dust attack was pretty much any launching move. But what if I told you this ain't where the juicy part lies? Some moves, like Cyclops' 3-3 string, launches your opponents very low, not allowing you to initiate the chase sequence. Still, if you time your following jump attack just right, you are still able to juggle your opponent, then land on the ground before your opponent falls, jump again and keep going like that. That's right, this game has restand combos. And the sickest part is that by restanding after a low launching air juggle, your combo counter resets, and together with it the combo scaling too. So you can do unscaled combos, which in turn can lead to touch of death scenarios. Oh, and there are so many of them. But they're much harder to do than it seems. This was clearly the developer's oversight, and that's why I mentioned that the depth and difficulty of mastering this game were not necessarily intentional. And I mean it when I say that these sequences are hard to perform. I'm okay doing electrics in Tekken with semi-regularity, but doing this stuff consistently? Too much effort. I got pretty okay at doing restand combos off of a chase air juggle, since the timing is much more lean, but doing those TODs off of a jab takes skill. A huge shout out to Sandalwood Grips, who speedruns this game and has some really sick combos and tech showcases on his YouTube channel. Him doing this stuff that would take me weeks to learn consistently is hella impressive. So please check out his videos and say hi if you will. In the meantime, having warmed up a little and taken grasp of the game's feel and core mechanics, I went back to stare at the abyss that this game's story mode was. And I stared at it for a while before plunging in. From the plot standpoint, this game is actually a sequel to the events of the comic story arc Operation Zero Tolerance, which was a follow-up to the Onslaught saga. Bastion, a special Sentinel unit determined to wipe mutant kind off the Earth, was the main villain of that story, and this game marks his return. X-Men Next Dimension's story starts with Prime Sentinel units retrieving Bastion's head from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s imprisonment in order to rebuild him. Bastion's plan then is to abduct Forge, a mutant with a very special superpower of being able to build any gadget he imagines, and to brainwash him to use this power for creating weapons capable of stripping mutants of their powers. A distraction plan is set to achieve this. Prime Sentinels disguise themselves as S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives and sell the defense plans of the X-Mansion to Magneto in order for his Brotherhood of Mutants to clash with the X-Men. And while they're busy fighting, the Sentinels would abduct Forge. And man, from the very first cutscene I was reminded of how bleak and moody this game is. Like, what the hell, man, why are Spider-Man, Ben Grimm and Tony Stark dead? Oh, it's just a danger room simulation. Cheap trick, but it kinda worked.
Improving in your group maneuvers, communication, improvisation, anticipation, and trust.
Hey, I recall that voice. It's Patrick Stewart himself who reprises his role as Professor X from the movies. He must have really liked the role since he had done it not just for this game but also for the X-Men Legends duology. What a cool guy. The game begins with us playing as Forge and going through the series of danger room fights, starting with Mystique and Nightcrawler, which go relatively smooth. Though, can someone tell me what is up with Forge's voice actor?
Cannon primed.
He sounds like he's going through a divorce and his soul is drained out of him.
Plasma quill charged.
Well hey, at least Nightcrawler sounds like an absolute Chad.
Ooh, your technique lacks a sense of style.
While we're on the subject, I should also touch upon the general sound design. To be frank, the sound work of this game is less than mid. The sound effects in X-Men Next Dimension came straight out of Mutant Academy 2, and if then it felt sort of fitting considering the cartoony and snappy look and feel of the game, here the developers obviously tried to go for a more realistic approach, so the contrast is too noticeable. The default sound balancing is far from perfect either, with voice clips being heavily muted compared to in-game sound effects and music during the action. It all feels disjointed. Just in general, I can see clear as day that Paradox Development tried to cut as much corners as possible when transitioning from the previous game to their new-gen effort. Take the character models. Although with higher poly count, they are nowhere near the quality of what this game's competitors had. Tekken, Soul Calibur, Dead or Alive, and MK all felt like proper next-gen games after their transition into the PS2 hardware, and their devs made tremendous efforts in making sure that each their character looks the best they possibly could. In contrast, the way characters look and animate in X-Men Next Dimension can sometimes be plain silly. And even though an improvement compared to the PS1 game, only an incremental one. Like, tell me, without context, would you be able to tell me that this is supposed to be Gambit? Even the CGI cutscenes look not too far off from what Mutant Academy 2 had. This jank and cheapness also leaks through into the gameplay. The hitboxes can be very wonky, with alignment issues due to the 3D nature of this game showing up in pretty much each fight. And trust me, I don't want to be considered a hater and just point out the wonky stuff, as I'm able to see and admire the good aspects this game has up its sleeves. For instance, the game's stages is where I feel the developers had put the most effort into. They genuinely rule. Not only do they look very detailed, varied and exciting, but also, taking cues from the Dead or Alive series, this game has some very cool stage transitions and interactions, with each level either having several layers through which you can launch your opponents, or other visual gimmicks, like this danger room stage where it transitions through several unique settings. Back to the story mode then. Having finished the first two, I guess you could call them tutorial fights, the game prompts you to select which character you'd like to be playing as next. Neat in concept that feature might be, though I feel it was slightly underutilized. I started by selecting my buddy Cyclops here, and then was forced to play as him for the next 3 consequent fights. Not counting retries when my butt got handed to me, each fight lasted for about 30 seconds, with the AI opponents being really good at defense. Having been spoiled by modern high-damage fighters where a match can end in under 15 seconds, these segments where you were forced to play as the same character for more than 2 fights felt like they dragged for too long. Especially so if the character you chose didn't really resonate with you and your playstyle. Like, this game has this wide variety of cool characters you'd potentially want to try out, but you're not allowed to switch between them after every fight. And it's not like selecting a different character would have any story consequences or unique dialogues. Sure, maybe the developers would have to work extra hard to implement varying opponents through story selections to avoid the lore-breaking mirror matches. But come on, they worked out the calculations for an accurate meter transitioning feature, so it couldn't have been that hard, could it? Anyhow, during the X-Men training session, Magneto attacks the mansion as planned, and you are asked to pick another character to fight off the Brotherhood of Mutants. Here comes Wolverine, and quite canonically the first fight is against Sabretooth. Gotta say, I love how they made him a grappler with various chain grabs that reminded me of King from Tekken, with sick confirms of stun attacks into grab supers. Man, what's up with these AI opponents being so good at blocking? It took me like 5 tries until I finally beat him. But surprisingly, it was an enjoyable experience, especially after I'd figured out Wolverine's launch sequence into air grab and finished Sabretooth off with a cool whiff punish. Having figured out my strategy by grinding Sabretooth, Mystique and Toad were all beaten on my first attempt. And let me tell you, I'm really glad that I beat Toad on my first try, cause I wouldn't want to hear his voice lines ever again. And then, there it was. My childhood trauma catching up to me. Forge versus Sentinel. Now, upon being thrown into this fight and listening to Forge's depressed voice lines, I found out why I struggled as a kid. Not only is Sentinel incredibly tanky, has armor on some of his moves and hits like a truck, there's also a 50-second time limit within which you have to beat him. No wonder my younger self had a hard time. Even now, the fight didn't go very smooth at all, and hadn't I figured out an exploitable chain of attacks, I'd likely be stuck on it again, reliving my past traumas. Yet, thanks to a well-timed super, I persevered. My past self, hope you're proud of me. From there on out, I was stepping into unknown, so I selected Havoc as my next hero and pressed on. Forge is captured by Sentinels, and having accomplished their mission, the Brotherhood of Mutants retreated. This is where it became a bit unclear for me from the plot perspective. Like, did Magneto really align himself with the Sentinels? I really don't get it. Why would Prime Sentinels disguise themselves as SHIELD operatives then, when passing over the X-Mansion plans? What exactly does Magneto get from following Bastion's plans? Doesn't he know that Sentinels are dead set on killing all mutants and should despise them much more than the X-Men? Seriously, I just don't get this part. Maybe I'm missing something and someone will be kind enough to clear things up for me in the comments, but for now, let's just roll with it. Having abducted Forge, Bastion sends the Brotherhood to different locations across the world to throw the X-Men off his scent. X-Men are split into several strike teams and go for a pursuit. Without much explanation other than that, we appear in some random Egypt tomb, playing and standing against Mystique. The CPU is ever defensive, but one atomic blast later, she's finished. Next one is Juggernaut, and I love how similar he looks to his Capcom iterations, with the same hunched posture and everything. Close fight, but we persevere. Then we fight Sabretooth, and wait, is that the Apocalypse laughing in the background? Guess this isn't just any pyramid after all. Cool Easter egg. Another atomic blast of a super move, and he's done. No more chain grabs for you, Larry. And this is when I caught myself thinking that, compared to early game, the last few fights were a breeze. I wondered if it was the fact that the computer opponents got easier, them having troubles versus Havoc specifically, or maybe I just adapted and got better at abusing the AI. Well, the next fight is against a brand new model of Sentinel, and guys, hear me out. Sentinel B is a brand new invention of Bastion, which he built thanks to Forge. And as intended, its main function is to strip mutants of their powers, which in gameplay terms translates into disabling your super moves when you're hit with any special on hit and on block. After finishing the fight, we are shown a cutscene of Magneto being chased by the Sentinels, and nope, still don't get it. He willingly cooperated with them just a few fights back. What did he expect? Magneto? More like Stupito. Having retreated to the Savage Lands, he is taken control of by us, the players, and together we are thrown into another fight against the Sentinels. And wow, Magneto turned out to be quite fun to use, specifically thanks to his combo string into launcher special, which Sentinel A has much troubles dealing with. Now it's time to play through the Brotherhood of Mutants story, and we are asked to select our next avatar. I chose Mystique, which I would soon regret. We watch a brief cutscene where the Brotherhood of Mutants act surprised that Bastion betrayed them, and Magneto is mad that his gang brought the X-Men right to their doorstep. Still, he sees it as an opportunity to convince them to act together against the Sentinel menace. Not before beating the crap out of them, of course, since it's the fighting game's staple. Our first opponent is Mr. Beast. No, not that one. And as his name suggests, he is wild. Especially compared to Mystique, he's so fast and acrobatic. I could barely land a hit on him while he was juggling me as if I was a typical Devil May Cry fodder enemy. So yeah, we are back to losing and going through trial and error process until I finally managed to beat him. The next fight is against Havoc, and it turned out to be a pretty even fight, with me doing a pretty sick sequence of attacks before finishing him off. On to his brother Cyclops. At this point, I had already been tired playing as Mystique, so I just wanted for it to end quickly. Alas, my first attempt resulted in getting perfected by Sykes. The combination of fast attacks, full-screen projectiles, and perfect blocking of my overhead strings mixed together into the recipe for me losing to him 4 times in a row, until I finally locked in and spammed my long-range super to advance the story. Our final fight in this sequence of events is against Rogue, and I gotta say, I just like her design in this one. Her suit has this nice contrasty look, complementing her iconic hairstyle, and the in-game model doesn't show that pronounced bald spot present on the character's select screen. Upon finishing her fight, we're done with this arc, and are thrown back into Magneto's skin to fight Sentinel A again? I guess they did make him a bit harder, since this time it took me a couple tries to end him. But I'm telling y'all, some gameplay choices the devs made when designing this game's story mode are outside my grasp. Having beaten Sentinels, we are finally done with the Savage Land chapter, and can select a new avatar. I made the safest choice of picking Cyclops again, and was greeted by a cutscene in which X-Men and the Brotherhood temporarily bury the hatchet and team up to stand against Bastion. Now it's time to beat their butts and go on a rescue mission to save Forge. So we first fight Sentinel A, then Sentinel B, and then Sentinel A again? I don't know, man, it's as if the story was written for a completely different X-Men game of another genre. I can see how it would work well with the X-Men Legends style of gameplay, where you epically team up with the Brotherhood, form a unique team and go on ahead destroying high-level Sentinel enemies. But in the context of it being a fighting game where each fight should provide a unique experience, this structure and pacing just don't work. In perspective, stuff like this really shows how much effort studios like NRS and Bandai Namco put in nowadays to make their fighting game stories actually exciting to play. Well, after a long and arduous fight, the X-Men are exhausted and partially stripped of their mutant powers, with Wolverine noticeably not being able to recover his wounds with his healing factor. Still, being the cool guy he is, he doesn't really give away his vulnerabilities, and together with Magneto, Phoenix and Juggernaut, they form the Vanguard to spearhead the attack against Bastion's base of operations. Wolverine charges in first, and together with a big bad guy, gets teleported to Asteroid M, where they fight. Now listen, I don't know much about Bastion in the comic books, but for the ultimate boss of this game, he doesn't really get anything going for him. Like, looking at this gameplay, would you say he has something that distincts him as a boss character? Aside from his Illuminati V-cut. Sure, he is capable of disabling your supers with every special that he does, but so did the Sentinels before him. And it's not like it was a hard fight either. All I had to do was spam the chain attacks that end with chase combos. And look, I was so bored I started to experiment with restand combos. After the fight, Wolverine is exhausted and Magneto, along with Phoenix, rush to our help. We're back playing as Magneto, and boy do I not give Bastion any chance. After the walk in the park that the end fight ended up being, the game ends with the long-standing FGC tradition of shaking hands, and Patrick Stewart's giving a monologue on how cool mutants are. After the credits roll, there's a funny scene of Juggernaut being stuck on the moon.
This sucks!
And that's pretty much all of the X-Men Next Dimension story mode. There's a fun little thing that I found out after my playthrough. If you somehow manage to lose the fight with Bastion as Magneto, the story doesn't actually end. You will continue now playing as Phoenix and getting an alternative, slightly worse ending. Nothing fancy, but it's cool that there's at least some variety depending on your gameplay outcomes. In total, it took me less than 1.5 hours to beat the story mode, so it's pretty short. Which would totally be fine if finishing the arcade mode with each individual character had some cool CGI ending for each of them. Something like the previous games, so it surely has it, right? Right. Well, I wanted to see for myself, and recalling how sick the fight against Beast was in the story mode, I picked him and went straight into arcade. And yeah, he's indeed very fun. The closest character I can compare him to would be Eddie Gordo from Tekken, and his strings are all very cool looking and fun to use. But here's the thing, no matter how much fun you're having playing as a character, having an arcade mode run last for 40 goddamn minutes, it is too much. There are 10 fights in total, 2 rounds each. And because of the very defensive nature of the CPU, each fight takes unnecessarily long. And get this, it culminates with the final fight where you have to win not 2, but 4 gosh darn rounds? Talk about artificial stretching of gameplay. And guess your reward. Guess your friggin' reward. All you get to see at the end is your character's profile card with narration from Professor X. Something that is usually put, I don't know, at the beginning of an arcade run, not at the end. And before you ask, no, having the arcade mode cleared doesn't unlock any characters or costumes. In fact, why don't we check the requirements for unlocking things? Let's see, 3rd costume for all characters, beat story mode once, guess that's already out of the way. 4th skin, win 1976 rounds? Yeah, alright, I've seen enough. Thankfully, this game did take something cool from Mutant Academy games. This one also has an unlock all cheat code. And yeah, credit when it's due, the unlockables are pretty cool. Among the hidden characters we have Sentinel models A and B along with Bastion. Then there's also Jean Grey that is soon to be cancelled on social media, Psylocke, Bishop and Blob. If you were to unlock them legitimately, you'd have to beat the arcade mode with Gambit to unlock Bishop, beat it again with Bishop to unlock Blob, achieve an alternate ending in story mode for Dark Phoenix, and do an arcade mode run with Betsy to have Psylocke at your disposal. Cyclops arcade mode run would then unlock Sentinel A, and having 20 consecutive wins in the survival mode finally unlocks Sentinel B. Considering that each arcade mode run should take on average from 30 to 40 minutes, it would take me at least 3.5 hours of play to get all the characters. Not too long in the grand scheme of things, but I'm glad that I could A. save this time and put it towards writing this script, and B. not be so sick to my stomach with this game so I wouldn't want to check out these unlockables in the first place. The first one I had to try out was Blob. And yeah, step aside Abigail, here comes the real big boy. His moves are actually quite funny, so good job Paradox Development. You made one of the best renditions of Plop in video games. I also quite like all the alternative costumes you unlock, something that I really enjoy in any fighting game, as when you think about it, the genre in itself is all about celebrating the characters. And what better way to celebrate such an iconic cast of characters than having them being portrayed with new distinct looks that pay homage to their legacy on one spectrum, or reimagining them through your own creative vision on another. And as you would imagine, X-Men Next Dimension has both of these, classic and modern suits and even those inspired by the X-Men films, so a great variety overall. And content-wise, there's not much left to talk about really. One thing I do regret is not having anyone by my side to play this game with. A big part of what made fighting games fun back in my preteen and teenage years was this presence of the social aspect. Unlike in the US and other regions where arcade culture was relevant, here in Ukraine we barely had any arcades. And those places that did have some machines wouldn't have any competition going. I remember how my late granddad used to take me to the central street of our city, and among other things there was a Tekken 3 arcade machine. People would line up for it, but strangely it was never two strangers competing against each other. Folks would just put their quarters in, go through the arcade mode, while the people in line would patiently wait until the person was done. Occasionally someone would play against their friend, but never against a stranger. Guess it's rooted in our Slavic mentality, to never bother someone you don't know and mind your own business. And it's not like it was just an isolated thing. Some years later I saw the exact situation at the MK2 arcade that I thought to be MK0, since the Roman numeral 2 looked like 0 to me. And honestly, I can't be too hard on myself for that. Up until that point in time I had only seen and played Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 on Sega Mega Drive 2, and that one had the Arabic numeral, hence the assumption. Back to the social topic, with consoles rules were clearer. It was your console and they were your buddies you invited to your house, so naturally you'd play together. Fast forward to present. Because I've gotten better at fighting games, whereas my friends got better at other aspects of their lives, they avoid my requests at sitting down for old time's sake and having some friendly matches in the most recent Tekken, Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter entries. Cause objectively they stand no chance against me. So, do I feel bad about putting in time and effort to become so good at fighting games that my close friends know that I'm handicapping myself when they do agree to play? No, not at all. It doesn't ruin our friendship or anything. Quite the opposite. It gave me an opportunity to find local Ukrainian fighting game communities. Or I should say, they found me. Since then, new bonds were formed and new horizons opened up for me. I regularly stream and commentate tournaments for our community and I love it. The members of FGC Ukraine and their support are the main driving force that gives these videos of mine the initial boost to be spread across the internet through the powers of the almighty algorithm. And I mean it when I say that I'm really, really grateful for that. So, in addition to my past self, I also dedicate this video to them. And what I'm trying to say is that if you love something and have passion for it, don't stay alone. If you've happened to just move to another country, found a job that you could get into because of your English, and overheard some dudes from a different department talking passionately about something you're really into, don't be like me and miss out on an opportunity to form new friendships and with them potential life-changing experiences. We all feel like we're alone in this universe, but it's much more bearable to be alone with someone else. And that's what this game reminded me of. And if you, my dear viewer, made it to this sentence, congratulations! You're a certified cool dude or dudette in my book. And I welcome you to join my Discord channel, the bonus stage, where we can discuss things we like and be real nice to each other. Warning: You might have some good time while you're in there. You'll find the link in the description to this video, so feel free to join, if you dare. With that, I thank you for checking out this video, and I'll see you next time.